Okay. No other questions? That takes us to item 6C, the Stage 3 drought update.
We need a bigger TV. I can't see. Is this it? Yes.
Got it.
All right. So, commissioners, chair commissioners, it has been a long 2 weeks. So I've been through this presentation once. So hopefully it will go smoothly. We're going to be going through the drought status, demand status, water supply strategy, water supply status. You'll notice that this packet is really set up. The council hasn't seen the water supply management report. And since we talked in detail in December, I'm not going to go over that again. Certainly, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to discuss those. This is going to council on the 30th.
This is different than the last thing the council saw.
Yes, the council hasn't had an update since early December. So you've now had, this will be the second meeting you've had that they haven't seen anything. So I'm kind of trying to get these. I'll likely feed a lot of the stuff I told you in December back into this report for council. So rain totals, that one event in the 8th, 9th there made a big difference. We went from, I don't know, like 5% of normal to 40% of normal. But clearly, it's hard to imagine this right now, but outside of the mud flows, we are really concerned about this year as far as drought. I mean, this is trending. Unfortunately, we have a plan, and it's following that worst case plan, basically, as far as how dry it is out there. We've gone over this. Basically, I was actually met with the new water person at UCSB, and we were talking about how we could get more refined data when it comes to this kind of large scale. I like this drought monitor because I hope it helps the community understand where we stand, but I don't believe it's quite accurate for our region of Santa Barbara County, and that's why I feel like it's somewhat misleading. And I was talking with her about whether there was a way to get better information that I could convey to the public, but I do think we are in extreme drought here, and yes, we did get a small reprieve last winter, but it really hasn't changed our long-term outlook. NOAA, unfortunately, the last update we had from them was on the 21st, are calling for below average rainfall for January, February, and March. Conservation for December, looking good for December, 32% conservation, which is pretty close to what we would have expecting. And that's our 30% was our goal for December. December was warm. And so that's, I think in the past we've seen different numbers. As we've always kind of get into these rainy months, it's really difficult. But it's really remarkable, actually, to hit that conservation target in December. Since we do have so much data points now, we're still sitting our 12-month running average at 40%.
I just don't remember December when that was taken. Is that before or after all the ash flow?
It would be before.
Yeah,
so
okay.
It is the 1st through the 31st. Yeah. So water sales, this has been an interesting one for me, interesting in a positive way. Revenues are looking strong, and trying to it's really hard because, as you can imagine, we have bills going out every day, revenue coming in every day. So it's difficult to pinpoint and compare it to the model. We can do a comparison at the end of the year, but it's difficult to do a month-to-month comparison. But what I can best tease out of it is what we are seeing is less Tier 1 water usage and more Tier 2, Tier 3 water usage than we might have predicted, which is leading to this. And because we have such a big difference between our Tier 1 water costs and our Tier 3 water costs, it makes a big difference. I mean, it's roughly a 5 to 1. That is why I believe we're meeting conservation targets and right on top of that, and why revenues still look strong. Again, the other part of this too is we talked about in the past is water loss has really gone down dramatically, and that I think is a product of all of our meter replacement. Conservation, yeah, we're still below, trending around 9,000, a little over 9,000 acre feet a year right now. No major changes here, but I was going to talk about it a little later, but this is probably a better spot. We are thinking about this right here, which is supply we have not identified yet. And to get there, this is 2 years out. We plan to start kicking off that discussion in the spring, but right now we've put in a request to CCWA, or I guess notice that we're looking for 1,500 acre feet of water. Now, if we get a full state water allocation this year, we may need nothing. We may be able to make it up with that. We get some rainfall, it'll make it up with that, but we've been through this a few times now. I just kind of giving you a heads up of what we're working on there. Is there any questions on this? Yeah.
Quick question. It looks like desal may be just shy of the 3,125 acre feet. Is that what is your expectation for desal this year?
The water year, I think you're going to be close. Keeping in mind, they have been a little bit off on their monthly totals so far. But the plant, so the way the plant works, it is rated at 3,125 acre feet a year, assuming it's operating 90% of the time. So it is within their capabilities. The plant actually produces more than 3,125. It is within their capabilities to actually make up for water that they were off a little bit in November and December, and so they have the opportunity anyway. If they aren't and they don't make those criteria, they actually pay us. They owe us $3,000 an acre foot for water not produced. I believe that's the right number for it. So they have a big incentive to make those, and every day we give them monthly delivery requests, we give them daily delivery requests, and so there's some days where we let them off the hook, such as the power outage during the Thomas fire. We basically said, you don't owe us any water for these days. So there's some discussions with that, but yeah, we'll see where it goes. It's in our water supply managers report where we are with that, though.
Go ahead, Michael.
So every time you throw that red bar in, I always get excited, as you know I do. So I just want to make sure I really understand this when I'm trying to explain it. So year 7 and 8, the top of the green bar is the projected supply amount, right? And so in year 9, we're saying that the projected supply is going to drop by that gap, and that gap is then replaced by the red area. Right?
We're saying that we have a shortage right now.
Okay. So at what point, if that's 2 water years away, we're in 1 water year, it's 2 water years away, when is the conversation held here on getting out in front of that via increased desal versus the cost of conservation due to rates because of less water sales? And which one of those is a better choice?
Well, I'm queuing this up for spring. So in the spring, you're going to have a few options that we'll lay out. And if we get rainfall, that gap may be closed by rainfall. That's one option. 2, we'll have an opportunity to purchase water. That'll be one option that we'll be talking about. We can talk about additional conservation. That'll be an option that'll be on the table. We can talk about desal expansion. That'll be another option on the table. All of those will be what we kick around in the spring once we have a little better idea of where we are with this winter.
I guess my constructive comment there would be to make sure as part of that conversation, when you're talking about costs of other things, desal, purchasing water, or increased conservation, that there is a cost to increased conservation. There always is, because you're not going to sell any water, right?
Yes, and that's always a difficult one, but yes.
Yeah, but I mean, so that needs to be part of the conversation.
Lost revenue.
Lost revenue needs to be on the same level of conversation as a cost of buying another train of desal, going to buy water from somebody else. Conservation is a cost, right? Does that make sense?
I just don't want to put conservation. I think what's important when we're talking about it is not a negative spin on it, but just factually, how do we talk about it? Because I don't want people to be deterred from conservation because
No, I get that.
Yeah.
But we tend to front load conservation as a good thing, and then, oh, by the way, afterwards, we have to raise rates because you conserved,
right.
right?
And maybe the message that's missing in that is that if you don't conserve, then we have these costs, right? And those are the costs that are. I mean, you can compare the lost revenue to the cost of purchasing water. That's pretty affordable, but then you got a cost of expansion of desal, which, depending on what we do, could range up to $40 million. And how does that compare? Yeah.
Just one quick question on the state water. You said that was assuming we get the full allotment. Is that like the 60%, or is that?
That does not assume. We've assumed 5%.
Okay.
That's what DDRBR has come out. They're so brave. Is it 5 or
Beginning
50?
of the year,
They may
so
have
it's
said. They may have
5%.
said. Sorry, they may have said 15. I just whatever it is, it was really low. I'm like, really? Is that your? That's really what you think is going to be available this year? So that's what's, and it's very preliminary. They don't make their final numbers till May. So, but that's up there. This is water. That 15% plus what we know we have in storage in San Luis and in Cachuma right now. That's state water.
Okay. So that could go up in
Yes.
a couple of months.
Exactly. That if they raise it to, my expectation is at least 65, even in a dry year, because everything up there is full. The only big question mark out there in my mind is Oroville, and whether or not they're going to have to dump a bunch of water from Oroville because the spillway is not going to be ready. That kind of stuff is my only concern there. So Gibraltar, we did get some inflow from the one-day event, basically. It is 500 acre-feet of something. I don't know that I would categorize it as water, but we got something that came into the lake. The lake came up 500 acre-feet. I'll leave it at that until it settles and we can see actually what of that was actually water. So basically, we are not taking any water from Gibraltar right now, except for about 500,000 gallons a day of tunnel inflow. Cachuma, it got roughly about the same, almost 600 acre-feet of inflow. Given the much larger reservoir, still waiting on the water quality data to come back, but the water looks good. Gibraltar looks pretty cloudy, but Cachuma looks pretty good. So far, demands are so low, we have plenty of water in Laurel Reservoir, and so that's been meeting our needs. But eventually here, we're going to start taking probably water from Cachuma. I was hoping to have some water quality data back by today, but I haven't gotten it back yet. Each time, as we've talked about before, in anticipation of a storm, we're going to fill up Laurel as much as it'll take, so that if we do have some temporary sediment loading on the lake, we can avoid bringing that down and driving up our treatment costs. Because I think one of the things that I do want to make clear that maybe we haven't covered in the past is we could treat the water in Gibraltar. I don't think I've made that clear in the past. We could treat it, but why when we have other sources available to us at a much, much less cost? Because once we start bringing in Gibraltar water, it turns any other water we have in there, it makes it much more expensive to treat. So I think from a security standpoint, we could treat it if that was our only source we had. But since we have other water that's much better, we're going to take that first. I'm not going to go too much into the fire here. I just wanted to touch a little bit, though, on making sure we understood what. So here's Gibraltar. Here's Gibraltar right here. This is Jameson. So this is the part of the watershed that now, let's see, right? I think right through here, this is Matilaha. So this area right here is now what we're kind of focused on as it relates to the Thomas Fire that's going to get into Gibraltar. And we've already seen that. Again, it's the kind of flow that, as we've talked about in the past, the watershed's not saturated at all. So the creeks run while it's raining, and as soon as it stops raining, they dry up. And so we just saw that flash. Basically what happened in Montecito came down and went right into Jameson and Gibraltar. And as we talked about before, please, if you have any questions, I know we went over this before, but if there's any questions on this, I'm happy to slow it down and talk about it again.
Go ahead.
Say that you could physically treat the water from Gibraltar right now. Meanwhile, if you don't, presumably a lot of that turbidity is going to settle out, and so the water quality get better at Gibraltar. So how fast does that happen? And does it get reset every time we get a rain pulse coming in?
That's a great question. Yes, it does reset every time we get inflows. In particular, when we get those, when Gibraltar last year spilled, that was great. We got a lot of the junk flushed out of there, and that was really helpful. As far as how long it takes, we're tracking that right now. The first initial flush was like, I think it had the turbidity was like 60, and it's last I heard yesterday was at 40. So it's coming down. 20 is kind of the threshold where we would want to entertain diverting water, but this just gives you an idea. I think turbidity, it's slow. Yeah. A couple weeks usually on that. Again, we kind of went over this last time, so unless there's any questions, we do have a plan to deal with. CARP has been on their wells, which is helping with demands. Our demands have been really low. Desal has been on. We do not have our wells on. I'm going to get ahead of myself here. But I feel like we're in a good spot, and we're following right along with it. I think our plan. As I talked about earlier, there it is. Sorry, it's 15% is our DWR allocation right now, which is about 500 acre feet of water. So we'll keep an eye on that. That could easily fill our debt. And then we're looking for 1,500 acre feet if things stay status quo. Groundwater, everything is off right now, but we are exercising it, making sure that it's available to us should we need to bring it back online. And then desal remains in full production. There are still things they need to do. One of the things that stands out is you see these units here. There's cladding that's supposed to go over them to protect the equipment from UV light and just kind of clean it up in there. And they still have not finished that work. So we're waiting on them to do that. I'm eager to get this thing wrapped up and finished so that we can introduce it to the public and open it up. But I really want to keep the pressure on them to finish some of these little items that they have left.
Just
Comment before I forget. Back up a slide.
Mm-hmm.
That should say Laurel, not Gibraltar, or
What does it say?
at the top.
Water basins, use of, yeah, we can update that. Thanks. That would be a great one. The DWR missed their deadline for letting us know. I guess good or bad. They even got their act together, and so they're telling us now late January. Oh, that's the same thing. Man, I updated that somewhere. All right, and then what we have, we've been working on a PSA on desal, and it's a little bit of a historical video to kind of talk about the history and then where we are today. And City TV, as usual, did a fantastic job kind of putting this together. Madeline really helped orchestrate all the speakers and the message, and so it's about a 5-minute presentation, and I thought we'd play that for you today. Not going to give me full screen.
Water, the most essential resource. We need clean water to drink, to bathe, and for basic human health and safety. It nourishes our plants, trees, and crops. But as we all know, Santa Barbara's semi-arid climate is susceptible to extended droughts. So what happens when the water dries up? In 1985, Santa Barbara's water portfolio was not as vast as it is today. Santa Barbara water came from 3 locations: Cachuma Reservoir, Gibraltar Reservoir, and groundwater basins. The extent of the 1980s drought took Santa Barbara by surprise.
It wasn't enough. And as the drought proceeded, we started looking for other sources of water.
At that time, a variety of solutions were proposed to the City Council to help alleviate the drought. Water police, higher water rates, and even bringing an iceberg from Alaska down to Santa Barbara.
Well, we knew we had to get another source of water.
In April of 1990, the City Council requested bid proposals for a temporary emergency desalination plant. Ionix won the bid and was contracted to finance, design, construct, operate, and maintain the desalination facility.
How that staff described that effort was that was running a 2-minute mile. It was hurried. It was a desperate effort. If we hadn't done that, we really would have been in trouble.
The Charles Meyer desalination plant took under 2 years to construct, and on March 4th, 1992, it started producing water.
And it tastes good too. Really.
After being put into service, local reservoirs were replenished by 2 years of above-average rainfall. The desalination plant was put into short-term reserve mode and eventually long-term standby.
And if the March miracle hadn't happened in March of 1991, where the reservoirs all refilled, we would have been really up a dry creek.
In July of 1994, the City Council approved the city's long-term water supply program, which included the desalination plant as a permanent water supply. Through this process, the facility underwent environmental review for permanent use.
And here we walk in there, 2 years ago or whatever, and there's this time warp of floppy disk Apple II technology that's in this room. It's just it's kind of wild.
Efforts continued until 1996 to secure the final permits to operate the facility up to 10,000 acre-feet per year. However, due to standby operating costs and deteriorating membranes, the city sold off parts. The sale of the permeable membranes helped to recoup the city's costs associated with permitting the facility and also reduced the long-term costs to water ratepayers for maintaining the facility. Between 1992 and 2011, Santa Barbara received variable but sufficient rainfall to supply our community's demands. However, in February of 2014, the city declared a drought due to a reduction in surface water supplies caused by 3 years of significantly below average rainfall.
In 2014, we had just experienced the 3 driest consecutive years in recorded history. And by 2014, after continued lack of rainfall, the city declared a drought condition and started implementing its water shortage contingency plan.
A resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara declaring a Stage 2 drought condition and establishing water use regulations to be effective during a Stage 2 drought condition.
Droughts are cyclical in nature. With surface water supplies dwindling, the city had to again look for an alternative source of potable water.
I said to people, well, just you wait, there will come a time when you will need that desal plant again.
On July 21st, 2015, the City Council unanimously voted to reactivate the desalination plant to help alleviate drought conditions in Santa Barbara.
It was a big decision for the council to pull the trigger on going forward in recommissioning the desalination plant. But I think, as I've said many times, desalinated water is so much better than no water.
Through a competitive bid process, the city hired IDE Americas to reactivate the desalination plant, and in September of 2015, construction started. Existing permits from the original facility streamlined the approval and entitlement process and saved on costs.
Having the old desal plant here has been invaluable. Not only has it secured a property to actually build the facility, but it's also really been fundamental to our permits, and it has secured us our intake pipeline, and it's also been critical to our outfall. Without that investment that was made in the 90s, there is no way today we'd be looking at having this facility here to help us.
The new plant has the latest desalination technology and is staffed 24/7. The plant uses 40% less energy than the original emergency desalination plant. It also uses better intake screens, along with many other technological improvements to reduce environmental impacts.
The first step in the desalination water treatment process starts at the intake pumps, located 2,500 feet offshore just south of Stearns Wharf. Seawater enters the structures through a fine mesh wedge wire screen, similar to the width of a window screen, at a velocity of less than 0.5 feet per second, which is less than the typical ocean currents. This design is considered the best available technology for minimizing marine life entrapment and impingement. After the water passes through the screens, pumps push the water onshore. Once on shore, additives are introduced into the water to help bind small particles together so they're easier to filter out. The water is then filtered through a sand and gravel filter to remove sediment, bacteria, and viruses. This process is similar to the process used for treating local surface water, such as water from Lake Cachuma. Next, the seawater is forced through reverse osmosis membranes at a pressure of 800 pounds per square inch. As the water passes through the membranes, the salt molecules and minerals are removed from the water to produce an ultra-pure water. During this process, approximately half of the water becomes drinking water, and the other half is rejected as brine. Natural minerals are then added to the ultra-pure water to make it compatible with existing water supplies before being distributed to customers. The waste product from the desalination process is referred to as brine and is about twice as salty as normal seawater. It is passed through an energy recovery system, which saves the plant about 40% in energy cost. It is then blended with the city's treated wastewater and is released into the ocean over 1.5 miles offshore. This blended released water is slightly less salty than the ocean and is released through a diffused pipeline to protect sea life.
In May of 2017, major construction was completed and the startup and testing phase began before distributing desalinated water into the water system. The total capital cost of the desalination plant was $71 million. The desal plant currently produces 3,125 acre-feet of water a year, and the design of the plant allows for future expansion up to 10,000 acre-feet a year, depending on the need of the community. Desalinated water is softer than surface and groundwater. Customers with water softeners in the desal water distribution area may have the opportunity to adjust their water softener settings to soften the water less, thus saving water and chemicals needed in their treatment process.
Desal water will meet all state and federal regulations, and we've been working really closely with the State Water Resources Control Board and the Department of Drinking Water to ensure that that happens. And again, reminding the community that there are over 1,800 desal plants in the world.
At its current capacity, the desal plant will provide approximately 30% of Santa Barbara's water needs during the drought.
What this desal does for us is actually diversifies our water supply portfolio, and that in turn allows us to be more resilient to drought. And that's really what the purpose of desal is to try and minimize our exposure to shortages in the future.
Even though the desalination plant rounds off the city's water supply portfolio, droughts are intrinsically cyclical, and conservation efforts are still an important part of our water supply.
You know, I think we're in a new normal. We have to recognize that this drought won't be the last one. We used less water before this recent drought than we did in the 1980s, even with bigger population. So conservation is going to be a constant, important part of our everyday water supply portfolio.
The city's current adopted long-term water policy considers desalinated water as a drought supply. However, the city's existing permits allow for a range of operating scenarios, which could include non-drought operations. When the drought emergency ends and our groundwater supplies have recovered from drought-related pumping, the role of desalinated water in the city's long-term water supply plan will be considered by the City Council.
The desalination plant is permitted for regional use, although it is a facility that's owned by the city. Right now, it would be the city's decision whether we would develop agreements to send the water to anyone else.
Water is the most essential resource in a community. The Charles Meyer Desalination Plant plays an important role in the city's water supply now and into the future.
All right. Any questions?
No, nice job.
Yes. Good
As
staff.
I was
Good
remarking to the chairman, I didn't see any footage of Charlie himself in there, so it must have been hard to find any good footage of Charlie talking, but if it's possible to come up with some,
It'd be great.
a few seconds of Charlie would be very appropriate.
I'll put that request in. I have never seen pictures of the man, so I think that would be helpful.
He was a tall guy with fairly bald hair, somewhat like me, but taller, and didn't have a beard. And although he was originally a Texan, he didn't talk like a Texan, and he was an engineer that I had worked with, and he originally suggested that I get involved with the Water Commission because otherwise, he said, just a bunch of realtors would.
That's funny. All right. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be
Questions from
happy
the
to
commission?
entertain those.
Megan?
Recycled water update. On the capacity issues that we've been having for some time.
Recycled water is operating. We are still working through the legal challenges on that, but meeting all of our needs. We're still not to the point where I feel comfortable. We have kind of a rough outline of an agreement with La Cumbre to provide water to them, but I don't feel comfortable at this point executing that agreement without some more capacity in our plan. And we're working a few different angles on that. The secondary aeration basin issue should ultimately be the silver bullet that solves that problem, but we're still pushing the design team to see what else can be done. But we kind of feel like we're running out of options with the current design that we have. Yeah.
Okay. No other questions. Thank you on that one, Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
Takes us to item 6D, CCWA, CCRB, and COMB update.
Kelly had provided me with an update, and I have, if you don't mind, I'll pull it up. And it's one of those things that I read it, and okay, I didn't put any of it.
Need to make a recommendation on that last thing, did we?
No.
No. Okay.
I think we got the recommendations that we needed from you in December.
Okay.
So were you not going to talk about that report? No?
The water supply management report? Yeah. I mean, so to
Have to.
I wasn't, because we talked about it in December, but I'm happy to speak to what it is. I mean, the report is a requirement that we have to do as a member of CCWA and a recipient of state water.
Right. So I just had my half full comment there. So, it's half empty comment. It's especially in that issues part.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that, as I coerced you into earlier talking about water mains, that certainly met the criteria of that sentence. There's other issues in that report that if you pick that up and ask, if you pick that up and ask that be an oversight of the state of water supply for the residents of the city, I think some of the issue things are too high altitude and there's too few of the low altitude ones, and one would be just in general capital infrastructure replacement issues. The struggles we've had with desal and the cost overruns and the ability to get it up and going, and the struggles we've had with recycle and getting that up to speed and being a player. What's in there kind of says we've done all these things and we've done something, but it doesn't, then when you get to the challenges or the issues section, it doesn't say these are the ongoing issues or challenges in those same areas that we didn't talk about. It kind of gives you the overall picture on water supply, but I would pose that water supply includes getting it to my house, right? Getting it to the customer. So those more internal problems that we have with issues that apply to those categories too, I think should be touched on. I recognize probably this is just a template that just gets getting used year after year after year, and who wants to reinvent the wheel? But it seems like water issues are not going to go away. They're always getting worse, or there is a new norm for what is worse. And a correct overview would be to talk about our accomplishments, but also, fess up or accurately talk about what our challenges are going forward, whether they're caused by us, not caused by us, caused by somebody else, whatever they are. So.
And I think one of the challenges too, I would love to explore this some more, but one of the challenges is we have all these reporting requirements that we're required to do, and specifically is the findings here are that our groundwater basin is in long-term balance. That's the whole point of this report. We go through this whole report, but where do we or where should we tackle some of these things? So I think you're going to see next month we have a report that's due to the Bureau. And again, it's a backwards-looking document. It looks back to 2017 is what it's supposed to look back. But maybe what we're getting at is a document not for another agency but for us that we want to take a look at.
I guess, but I hate suggesting that because that's just more time and work on somebody's part.
Well, and I'm trying to figure out how to take it. Right. Do you incorporate it into these other ones that aren't asking for it and give them more information than they're asking for, or do we pull from these various reports and create our own internal significant issues list?
Okay. So
yeah.
Just my feedback on
yeah,
it.
no, I think it's
it
good.
just kind of jumped out at me when we talked about our stuff in the first part. We neglected to talk about some of the challenges, and then when we get to the challenges, we really talked about the high altitude challenges in terms of water supply, what's going on at Kachuma, what's going on with the pass-through, stuff that really doesn't mean anything to somebody other than they want to know why aren't we recycling up to the capacity? What
right.
There's a challenge still there. Why did a desal end up costing so much? There's a challenge there. Why can't we have more desal really quick? There's a challenge there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that may not be the place, but to me, just pick that up and say that was the state of the last 12 months. There's some stories missing there.
The other one that is the urban water management report. That's the other one that we just wrapped up, and that's the one we do every 5 years. And again, that's very boilerplate template. Here you have to check off these boxes. Another report that we do, should we take that and make it into something more that would be more meaningful to us? Really, our meaningful one is the long-term water supply plan, which we need to update. But I think what you're getting at is something in between that, something that's.
I like when that's annual.
Right.
Yeah. I had brought up a year ago that we're actually doing some decision-making relative to long-term water supply incrementally because we have to. Mm-hmm. Things come up, you got to make a decision here. Things come up, got to make a decision there. And they all add up. And again, I saw essentially we're building a long-term water supply plan as we go. And we kept talking, or we did. We had an annual having an annual retreat in August or whenever we did that last time. Mm-hmm. And that would be a good time, again, going back to that is build, what decisions have we made? How does it impact? And what are the issues that are outstanding that are actually heading towards the long-term water supply plan? And have that discussion. And all it needs to be at that point is an outline of accomplishments and issues that we are essentially moving forward. So that by the time we officially kick off the long-term water supply plan, groundwork's all done, the discussion's underway, and then we're looking at options, alternatives, and outcomes. Mm-hmm. So, just a thought.
Yes, I think that's a great idea.